We'll do a review of Likutei Sichas in Chelek Tezvav, volume 15, the second sicha for the Parsha Vayigash. This is a Rashi sicha in which the Rebbe explains in the pasuk we learn that when the brothers of Yosef and Yaakov came to Yosef and the land of Goshen, the pasuk says, "Umiktsei echov lokach chamisha anoshim." Part of his brothers, some of his brothers, he took five of his brothers, vayatzigim lifnei Pare, and he placed them before Pare. The question becomes, who are these chamisha? Which of the five of the brothers did Yosef bring? So Rashi says, that he chose those who were least strength, had least strength. That were not visibly gebodim. And the reason was, because if he would see that the brothers look strong, he would appoint them, he would make them people of the war. He didn't want to do that. So now the question is, who are these brothers that were the weak ones? So Rashi enumerates and he says, Ve'elohim, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Ubinyamin. So we have five. These are the five. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Ubinyamin. Those are the five weak ones. How do we see what makes them weak? So Rashi says, later on in the Parshas V'zois HaBrocha in Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu blesses all the Shvatim, and there are those that Moshe Rabbeinu did not duplicate their names when he blessed them. But the names of the mighty ones, besides Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, V'yom, the other ones, he repeated. As we look at the pasuk, it says, "V'zois liYehuda, Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda." The name of Yehuda is mentioned twice. Ulegod, Omar Barchim Machil God. So God, two times God. Naftali, Omar Naftali. Uledon Omar Don. V'chein liZvulun. V'chein loAsher. So basically, the names of the Gibodim, he was Kaifel, and the other ones were the weak ones, and the other ones are the ones that he brought, which is Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Binyamin, the ones whose names are not duplicated in the parsha of V'zois HaBrocha. This is the language of the Bereshis Rabbah, which is the God of Eretz Yisrael. Avol b'Talmud Bavli Shalonu, Rashi says in the Gemara, the Babylonian Talmud, ours, you have the Talmud Yerushalmi as well, but this is the Talmud Bavli. Motzinu, we find the opposite, that the weaker ones, those that Moshe repeated their names, they were the weak ones. So it turns out that all these that Rashi, and them he brought before Pare. So all these names that were duplicated over there, those are the weak ones. And those are the ones that he brought before Pare. The obvious thing we know that Yehuda was strong. That is obvious. So why was his name Shuchpol Shmoi? So how come over here Rashi just quoted? If we're saying that the names were duplicated for the weak ones, and one of them is Yehuda. Yehuda, Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda. For sure Yehuda wasn't from the weak ones. So how could we say that his name was duplicated because that the duplication of names is for the weak ones? So Rashi Yehuda Shuchpal Shmoy Luchpal Mishum Chaloshos. That wasn't because he was weak. There's a special reason for that. Rashi concludes with Braisa the Sifrei Shaninu Bava V'Zei Sabrocha K'Vei Talmud Shalom. In the Braisa Sifra, in the portion of Zei Sabrocha over there, it's like in our Gemara that the ones that Moshe duplicated in his bracha were the weak ones. Hey Machalosh. Okay, a very long Rashi. The Rebbe is going to ask him in all the length and the details in this Rashi, unusual in the special languages. The Rebbe is going to explain all this, but the Rebbe's first and main issue is also that in here Rashi brings down two interpretations who were the Chaloshim, who were the ones that he brought. We know that 5 of them were Chaloshim, and those are the ones that he brought to Parei. But the question is, who are those 5? So over here, the question is, are these the ones that the names were not duplicated, as Rashi brings down in his first commentary, or the ones he brought to Parei were the ones that the names were duplicated, with the exception of Yehuda was duplicated because his name, because of a special reason that Rashi says. So over here, Rashi brings down the 2 Pirushim, who these Chaloshim were, whose names. But later on, the Rebbe quotes from the Rashi, later on, Rashi seems to be clearly saying that it's the name of the Chaloshim that he had to duplicate over there. So how do we reconcile these 2 Rashis? And also the Rebbe will bring down that according to our Rashi, we say that it also would include the tribe of God. He was from the Chen Zvulun, God Omar, Baruch Marchiv God. So that means that he was from the Geborim. But if we should say that the names that you had to duplicate, as Rashi says in the second parish, is that these Chaloshim, so that means that God was the Chaloshim. And Rashi clearly writes in several places that God was the powerful, they went ahead of all the Yidden to fight, to conquer the land, as Rashi says several times. So the Rebbe is going to reconcile and explain all the different Rashis, why Rashi says in one place one thing similarly, and then seemingly says different in the other place. Let's look inside. Aleph. On the verse of some of his brothers, he took 5 of them and he stood them up before Parei. Is Rashi Mefarish? Rashi explains, and that's the first pshat, is min hapechusim shabahem, that those were the lesser, not strong ones in the Gevura. They weren't as strong. She'inirim giborim, so they don't appear to be strong. She'im yira isim giborim yasa isim anshim ulchamtei. He's going to make them. Parei will make them as his warriors. They didn't want that, so he took the weak ones. Now, who are the weak ones? The 5 weak ones. Rashi brings down 2 opinions. Who were these weak ones of the tribes? So, first, Rashi brings down Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, and Binyamin. Those are 5. Those that Moshe did not repeat their names. When Moshe Rabbeinu gives the bracha, he does not duplicate the name. When he blessed them. But the names of the Geborim he did duplicate. The Rebbe, very interesting also later on during the sicha, explained what is the meaning that the Geborim kofal or not kofal, but we'll leave that for later. Rashi goes through the name of the Geborim, so he starts with Yehuda and goes through Naphtali, got all the details as we quoted from the Rashi. Zehu Loshon Bereshis Rabbah. This is the language of the Bereshis Rabbah. Shehi Agodas Eretz Yisrael. That's the Agodah of Eretz Yisrael. Aval b'Gemara Bavli Shalonu, but in the Babylonian Gemara ours, what's seen over there, we find that those who Moshe had repeated their names, they are the weak ones. Those names that had to be duplicated. And it was them that he bought before Pare. According to this, as we learned before in the Rashi, inside, it would seem that also Yehuda, he brought before Pare, but we know that Yehuda, it gives, Rashi says Yehuda another reason. Rashi concludes, in the Braise, in Sifri, we learn in Zayis Abracha, maybe Gemara Shalom, like in our Gemara. Very long details. Rebbe will explain all the details in all the Rashis. Rebbe will see. Isn't it verstandig? So it's not understood. Aleph, number one. The main thing is to know that we don't know exactly who the 5 tribes were. So Rashi brings down that there's 2 opinions who they were, but because we don't have any clue who they would be. So Rashi brings down. But why does Rashi have to get into the whole sources and tell you that it's Agoda and Breshis Rabba and tell you that they agree and the Sifri agrees with us? Those was Rashi darf bringen. This that Rashi needs to bring from Razal, from our sage blessed memory, wer von the Shvotim seine gewende Chaloshim, who amongst the tribes were the weak ones, wer die Geboim, who were the strong ones, is moving. We understand why Rashi needs to come on to the words of our sages of blessed memory to tell us. Because the simple literal level of the pasuk, you don't know who are the weak ones and who are the ones that he brought to Pari, who are the weak ones. But what is it in the simple meaning over here? Why do we need to know the further explanation that Rashi brings? The arichas of protim, the length and the details. That this is tied to the fact that he did not duplicate their names when he benched them. Or their kofal, or he did duplicate who are the weaker ones. Why is that important? Rashi references, side by side, in any event, Rashi references, Drai Sforim. He brings down 3 Sforim. He brings down the Bereshis Rabbah. He brings down the Talmud Babli Shalom. He brings down the Agodas and the Braise of the Sifri. Drai Sforim al Smoker is Haretzu Yovev. So one who wishes should come and look it up in the sources over there. Why does Rashi have to go in and bring us down this whole arichas? Base. Number 2. The fact that Rashi brings here 2 opinions means to say that according to Pshut Shemikra, there's no decision, but Rashi later on does make a decision that it was the weak ones that were duplicated. That's what Rashi says in the portion of his Eitzabrocha. Base. For them, was Rashi brings 2 days hofches. The fact that Rashi brings 2 contradictory opinions from Razal, from our sages blessed memory, is muchach, so it's evident. As in Shutishal Mikra Do, that in the simple meaning over here, is the talking achrot sufficient the days. We don't have a decision amongst these opinions. We don't know. But still, why does Rashi bring the first one first? Because it's more comfortable. Says nor, it's only was in Ershtem Pirush is do a gewisser Yisrael. In the first commentary, there is a certain advantage, the Gabe dem Tzveiten, relative to the second commentary. When the Rebbe brings it in free, that's where Rashi brings the first one first. But Rashi doesn't decide like the first one, just that there is some advantage to it, but not enough to make a decision with the first one. That's what Rashi brings both. Is do if them at zwei. So we have a double question over here. The fact that we say it's not decided, because number one, the Rebbe says in the Zoyis Abrocha, Rashi does decide that the weaker ones is the ones that needed the names duplicated, as Rashi says there. And number 2, Rashi writes clearly that the God were the strong ones. So it means that the ones that were duplicated must have been the strong ones. And so how does Rashi not decide over here, say that they're equal? Aleph. In V'zois HaBrocha, Zokt Rashi Mefeirish, Rashi clearly states in V'zois HaBrocha, As Chamisha Shvatim Shebeirach Ba'achrona, that the 5 tribes that he benched at the end, which is Zvulun, Gad, Dan, Naphtali, Va'asher. Kofal Shmeiseyem Lechaz Kobul Lagbiram. He duplicated their names to strengthen them and to give them gevura, to make them strong. And the reason is, Rashi says, they were the weaker in all of the tribes. Heim, Rashi says, they are the ones that Yosef led before Parei. Part of the brothers, he took 5 people. These are the people. Was Zvulun, Gad, Dan, Naphtali, V'asher, those whose names he duplicated at the end. Excluding Yehuda, which was in the beginning. But in the end, the last 5, as Rashi brought by us, that was for another reason. But over there, the last 5 was duplicated because to strengthen them, because they were weak. And they were the ones Rashi said brings down that he brought before Parei. Does haste. So what does it mean? As in Pshuta Mikra, in the simple meaning, Rashi doesn't say this is a medrash. Rashi doesn't say like over here in different places. Just teaches it. In Pshuta Mikra, Balder Zoktas Bistam, since it just says it plain without a name, under or without a referencing, under Bavornish, he doesn't have the cautioning by saying what they are. Rebbe said so or similar. Is a dort machria as a vidit. So that means that Rashi over there has decided like the second opinion. So why do we have 2 opinions over here when Rashi has their like the second opinion that it is the weaker ones that he brought that he mentions the name, that the weaker ones includes those 5 Shvatim who he had to mention their names. And then we have another problem because God, actually Rashi brings down, was actually from the stronger. So that seems to go with the first shot over here, that those who were duplicated were the strong ones. Base, Parshas Matis, the portion of Matis, and also in the portion of the Vorim, in the Parshat Vorim, in the Parshat Vorim, in the Sefer Vorim. But the Parshat Vorim at the end, Zokt Rashi, Rashi says very simply, without hesitation, that's the simple shot. Hashevet God is given sufficient divos gibayim, that the tribe of God was amongst those that were strong. Verkehrt zokt in V'zois HaBrocha. This is opposite than what Rashi says in Zois HaBrocha. As a pipshuta shel mikra, in the simple meaning of the pasuk, as God, a pipshuta mikra is given, as pipshuta mikra, God is given from the chaloshim. Over there, Rashi says that God was from the weak ones because the pasuk duplicates his name, Baruch Marchiv, God Amar Baruch Marchiv God. So since we duplicated, that means that he was from the weak ones. And in the other parts, in Matis and Devarim, Rashi says that he was from the powerful ones. Well, what are we going to say? That maybe in the Parshas Matis and Devarim, where they're going out to war ahead of all the Shvatim, okay, we have to say over there that they were powerful ones. In the pasuk over there that they were duplicated, Rashi learns that why was it duplicated? Because to give them strength means that they're weaker one. So each place Rashi explains it what bears out from that place, but that doesn't really fit. We can't have Rashi contradict himself and saying, well, in this case it's mashma like this, and in that case it has to be one way or the other. You can't answer on this. As a jeden Fall bazunder is Rashi mefarish that in every case, separately, individually, as Rashi explains, loidves is muchrach and pshutish mikra lasar, according to what it is forced in the simple meaning on the place. When the parish says matzud dvorim, so when we're learning parish matzud dvorim, is a pshutish al mikra, simple meaning of the verse. Muchrach, we have to say, as Shevet God is given from the Geberim, that the tribe of God was from this strong one. Und in V'zois HaBracha, muss man sagen, and in V'zois HaBracha we have to say, as Shevet God is given zwischen the Fim, Shvatim, Chaloshim, was the weak ones. Over there, they're going to fight ahead of the, must say that they were the stronger ones. And over here, they're the weak one. So what were they? The weak one. So you can say, Rashi has to explain each place according to what comes out according to there. What about our parsha where Rashi brings both? The parsha is saying, and in our parsha we don't have a evidence that will decide. Can't say that, the Rebbe says. Can't have a Pshutish Mikra have a difference. Can't have God being the strong one in one parsha, and according to Rashi, in one being the weak one, and another parsha we don't know who he was. Come upon him, as we said many times. And it's something which is simply self-understood. As Ken is Zayin, it's not possible as the Pirush al Pshutish Mikra, that the interpretation based in according to the simple meaning of the pasuk in Einor Zolzayin Bistira, so should the way we explain it in one place should contradict some Pirush al Pshutish Mikra to the meaning of Pshutish Mikra in Atzveit Nord in another place. So first, in Ois Beis, the Rebbe will address this Gebodim part of the Bnei God. That although Rashi says that God were strong, it still doesn't contradict the Rashi in Dvorim, in which Rashi says that the Bnei God were weak. They had to duplicate the name, the way Rashi learns in the end of the Parsha Dvorim by the V'zois HaBracha, because perhaps the Rebbe says that God himself could be that he was like a very powerful person. And the fact that they were weaker later on this is the second thing that Rabbi explains over there, that God ben Yaakov was maybe of the weak ones. So that's why when Yaakov was giving the bracha, as it says in Parshas HaBracha, he was the Chaloshim. That's why when he brought him over there, who did he bring to Yaakov? Who did Yosef bring to Paroi? He brought God, because God could have been weak. The fact that the pasuk says that they were strong people, that could have been they intermarried with other tribes who were strong, with the other ones who were the strong ones, and maybe the children became strong. But the Rebbe is going to explain to see how all these three Rashi works out. Base. That Beir benegei dem shinu hanal from Pirush Rashi do und sein Pirush in Parshas Matis Udvarim. So first, he's going to explain the difference between Rashi over here in our Parsha, in the portion of Vayigash, versus the Rashis in Parshas Matis Udvarim. Because, as you mentioned earlier, by us we have both. Either we said that God was the strong one according to the first one, because Huchpal Shmoisov was the strong one, the first Pirush Rashi, or he was the weak one. So the Rebbe said like this: Das was men gefindt, as in ein Ort bringt Rashi zwei Pirushim. So we find that Rashi sometimes will bring two commentaries in one place. He explains only according to one interpretation. Doesn't mean that in the other pasuk, in this case, in the Parsha of Matas Udvorim, Rashi changes his mind from the way he learned in the Parshas Vayigash. Like in our case, we're not going to say, well, in Parshas Vayigash, Rashi, it's okay to Rashi to learn that God was weak. That was the second shot. And over there, Rashi just brings down that God was strong. We can't be a contradiction. But the fact that Rashi doesn't bring down the second pshat doesn't mean that Rashi doesn't agree that there's two pshat. There could be two explanations. The Rebbe explains now why Rashi would not bring down both interpretations. Not because he doesn't think that both interpretations are valid in Pshuta Shal Mikra at this point, but rather there's a reason. But Ken Zayin, it can be Tzvei Sibas. There can be two reasons. So we can say two ways. In most cases, Aleph, the first situation is Rashi will bring down the second pshat only because the second pshat needs to be further explained, the second interpretation, when we come to that pasuk. So originally, Rashi says there's two explanations. Now we're coming to this place. So Rashi only explains, this is the majority of the cases, one interpretation, because that interpretation has difficulty. It doesn't mean that Rashi chose that interpretation now. It only means that Rashi feels a necessity to explain one of the two when it comes to this pasuk. This is in most cases, Aleph, the Rebbe says. In most cases, Beruba Deruba, Leuten gebrachten Pirush, that the Pirush Rashi does bring, it's not because he decided that Pirush, but the Pirush that he does bring is Farana Shverikait in Zweiten Pasuk. In this other pasuk that we're learning now, Rashi before said there's two meanings, two interpretations, but now there's difficulty. So therefore Rashi answers it in his Pirush, that difficulty that arouses according to the second interpretation. As opposed to the other not brought on Pirush, Rashi doesn't negate that, but in the pasuk movement pashtus, the pasuk is self-understood. It's and therefore when it's further so there's no need for Rashi to caution to answer it. So therefore Rashi doesn't bring it. He only brings the second one because the second one requires additional clarification based on this pasuk, but it doesn't negate that first pshat. That's one way. But yet there's another way, which the Rebbe is going to apply in our case. Siba Hofchis, there can be another reason. Ba'b'mokrim zeh is from Pshuta Shel Mikra mashma loit vider gebrachter Pirush. Over here, it seems like the above mentioned. So in other words, the reason we're bringing it, not because it's a difficulty, but fakert. We're trying to say that this Pirush over here but we're still not negating. We're not saying, well, the other Pirush doesn't fit. Rashi brought it down before, because we can answer that. But Rashi brings it down to tell you, based on this pasuk, it seems like the other Pirush is more comfortable. Siba Havchis, that's the other, right? But b'mokum zeh is from Pshuta Shel Mikra mashma, that if in this place it appears Pshuta Shel Mikra, loit vider gebrachter Pirush, similar to what he brings down. But we have to say, but it says nit mukhrach. We don't have to. It's mashma. If it was mukhrach, then Rashi wouldn't bring down before two pirushim. But in this one, since now it's more mashma, it's not mukhrach. But we can also answer according to the other pirush. So we bring down one of them because that's the most comfortable to sort of say that it's mashma like one of the pirushim. Similar to the second reason is in our case. In our parsha, in the parshas Vayigash Take, we can say both ways, but over here, it's mashma like the first pshat. The parsha saying is Take nit muchrach vere seine gewend die chaloshim vere die gebäude. We don't have any evidence who is the chaloshim. Aber in parshas Matis Udvorim, but in the portion of Matis Udvorim, is mashma as bnei God seine gewend gebäude. Over there, it's mashma that they were gebäude. Because had they not been gebäude, why would they suggest we are ready to go first in front before the Bnei Yisrael to wage war? Moshe Rabbeinu would not accept their suggestion. And then he would tell them in a command, you should go ahead before your brothers, this chalutzim, the forefront, to go ahead and wage the war. Why would he tell them to do that if they were weak? So, so therefore, if this is what's mashma, so we can't say those was Rashi is mefarish beparshas matas udvorim, that matas dvorim as bnei God seine given gebäude is as to leave them was better. That the reason that they are gebäude is because later on, kofal shemoisum in sein bracha, they became gebäude because maybe later on. Because this is all happening before the bracha of Moshe. So nothing changed around over here. So they were gebäude. We have to say that it's mashma that they were inherently gebäude. Can it sagen, that those was Rashi is befarish pashem matus udvorim as bnei God seine gewen gebäude is as to leave them was später kofal Moshe shmois with sein bracha. Later on, he made them into gebäude. We frat as the Rai for Rashi as gebäude, especially Rashi brings proof is not nor from Posik v'acholutz over lifneihem, which is in the portion of Yeshua, where they act for stating Yeshua. That means that they were actually gebäudim there, and maybe they were gebäudim after the fact. They turned to the gebäudim from Moshe Rabbeinu's bracha. That's written in Yeshua. Maybe the fact changed. In a zman was noch brichas Moshe, that took place after Moshe's blessing. So you can say maybe Moshe's blessing made them into gebäudim. Nor from the psukim parshas matas udvorim gufa. Far brichas Moshe. Rashi's evidence is from the psukim and the portion of matas and dvorim itself, which speak before the blessing of Moshe. So that means that they were already gebäude. So it's mashma that they weren't the ones that the weak ones, they were the strong ones then. So that's mashma. So now, okay, so we're saying in mashma. So why is this not Rashi evidence clearly like the first one? Rabbi says it's mashma. In the second, when we learn matis and dvorim, in the parshas dvorim, over there it's mashma that they were gebäude. But l'cheira, why is it only mashma? But it's very clearly, why would they go out and tell them to go wage war if they weren't? We know that it wasn't the bracha Moshe made it, but they were gebäude. But how could Rashi possibly say the second pshat that it was the weak ones? How could God be weak ones that he had to duplicate the names and that God wasn't the weak one? Und es ist nicht kein Stire, explains the Rebbe, zum zweiten Pirush in Rashi, the Parsha saying, to Rashi's second interpretation in our Parsha, as God is given for the Chaloshim, that God was from the weak ones. Rashi clearly says that God was the weak ones. The same thing is also in the next Parsha. The Rebbe will address the next Parsha following this, in the Parshas, in the V'zei Sabrocha, the Rebbe will address them. Warum leit dem Pirush kemen zogen? According to the second Pirush, we could say the Pashtus. You can answer. As God ben Yaakov is taking given for the Chaloshim. God himself could have been from the weak ones. Aber Yotzech Halotzom, Anshe Shevet God. But those who came from him, the people of the tribe of God, 250 years better, 250 years later, the generation that entered Eretz Yisrael, they were Gebeiter. It's not a stira that he was there, so this doesn't contradict. Yeah, it's mashma that they were Gebeirim, but it doesn't mean they had to be Gebeirim. So the people that after the whole, the end of the, before they're going into Eretz Yisrael, so this was a long time later. The 210 years they were in Mitzrayim, plus the age of God, the Rebbe comes up with 250 years. As the Shvatim haben sich mischatten gewesen, eine mit der anderen. The Shvatim married into one another. Hat doch gekonnt sein, it's possible, as Bnei God haben sich mischatten gewesen mit den Bnei Shvatim HaGeberim, that the sons of God married with the daughters of the strong ones. God may have been weak, but their children married with some of the other ones, if according to the second of those names that were not repeated, who were strong. And they got that strength from the mother's side of the family. So this is how we reconcile Parshas Vayigash with the Parshas Matis and Devarim. It's blight of and move on, but it still remains not understood. What is the mashmos in the Zois Habrocha? Why in the Posei Habrocha over there Adivos Kofal Shmoisom Zanagiven Chaloshim, that those who duplicated the name were the weak ones with their Tzveiter Pirush in Rashi with Parsha Seina as the second Pirush in Rashi in our Parsha. So what's the why is that? And if this actually appears to be the pshat in the simple meaning, why doesn't Rashi bring this as a main, as the first and the main point? The Rebbe doesn't ask why does he bring it at all, but why doesn't he bring it as the main point? The Rebbe further asks in those Gimel all the lengthy details in this Rashi. What's the reason for that? Gimel. We also need to understand Rashi how come Rashi in our portion is number one, Mayrich in Zain Pirush. Length is long in his commentary, and Tzvei, number two, Rashi. A language was totally unusual in the Pirush Rashi, as the Rebbe points out. What are the difficulties here? Aleph at his Moisif, he had Zeu Loshem Bereshis Rabba Shi Agodas Eretz Yisrael. Loshem Bereshis Rabba, which is Agodah Eretz Yisrael. Right? We don't find the Rashi. The Manaf Kimina. What does the Rashi say that? Based the Loshem, the Gemara Bablis Shalonu, in the Gemara Babylonian Gemara. Why does Rashi bring that down? And Gimel. In the Braise of the Sifri, we learned like in V'zois HaBrocha, like in our Gemara. So what all these details? All of the Meinaf Kamina as a in Braise of the Sifri. What different does it make that this is also what is written in the Braise and Sifri? Base number two, what is the deal? The Braise of the Sifri. Instead of saying Sifri, he says in the Braise of Sifri. And Gimel number three, Lemnainach Kamina. What difference does it make? See, the Braise and the Sifri is in the Zois HaBrocha. That the Braise and the Sifri is in the Zois HaBrocha. Other than another parsha. Why does Rashi add all this? Dalit. So, the Rebbe is going to explain that in the Pasuk, Rashi needs to explain who the five brothers were. Because the Pasuk doesn't say anything. The Bir B'chol Zeh. When we say that a part of his brother, he took five of the men, and we don't explain who they are, so then it's logical to say, there's somewhere in the Torah that these five tribes have been distinguished, separated from the others. Say 5. Why these 5? So we have to look. So this gives Rashi a need to go find these 5. That's why Rashi brings the length, the explanation of our sage blessed memory. Das ist verstandig from Birchas Moshe. We can understand it from the blessing of Moshe. Was by a chelik from the shvatim kafal shmoisam. A portion of the tribes he duplicated their names. A portion he did not duplicate the name. Das ist der einzige Ort. This is the only place where we find in as Torah is that the Torah distinguishes Fim, Shvatim, Bazunder, 5 tribes separately. Where do we find it being divided, split into 5? It's in the Parsha of Zayis HaBracha and the Bracha. Loi di zwei Yefanim from the zwei Pirushim. Both ways of the 2 Pirushim, whether distinguish them for the strength or for the weakness. Lidoch Gisa. On the other hand, Hagam as do taich the Torah nit ois. Although the Torah does not here articulate, ver es seinen given, the Chamisha Chaloshim, who the 5 weak ones were. From them, aber was man hat gelernt, bizaher, from that which we learned up till here, kemen yevis and b'pshuta shel mikra, the simple meaning we couldn't know wegen the gevura and chalushos von enik shvatim. From some of the tribes, we could know their strength and the weaknesses of some of the shvatim. So we do have a clue from what we learned till now. Lernen the parsha from Shechem, when we learn the section of Shechem, legt sich bepashtus, it seems, it makes sense simply as Shimon and Levi that Shimon and Levi were strong, they were powerful. Men, the 2 of them killed all men from the city of Shechem. So therefore, the first interpretation is difficult, as that those whose names were not repeated, that if the names weren't repeated, that makes them Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi's names are not repeated. So, according to the second pshat in Rashi, that the names of the not repeated one, the names that, according to the first pshat of Rashi, that the ones that are not been repeated are the weak ones. That means second pshat. I'm sorry, I was going back and forth. Oisam shaloi kofal shmoisam, that zayin di chaloshim. The first shot. So because I'm going back and forth. The first ones, which is Rashi's first shot, that Yehuda and all these were the duplicated, so therefore they are the strong ones, and those that were not repeated are the chaloshim. And since Reuven, Shimon, and Levi were not repeated, means that the chaloshim. So Bariber bringt Rashi them pirush. Sha'oisam shekopal Moshe shmoisam. So Rashi says therefore the first pirush, that it was those that were names were repeated, Zayin and Chaloshim, that they are the weak ones, meaning the second pirush Rashi brings down, that those that were duplicated are the weak ones. Obemeila, Kumtois, Ashim and Levi, Zayin and Gebayim. So Rashi brings the second shot because that way Shimon and Levi will be amongst the Gebayim because their names weren't duplicated. And we know that Shimon and Levi were Gebayim. They're my Muz Rashi Obe Babornen. So therefore Rashi has to caution us. Okay, we know that Reuben, Shimon, and Levi were Gebayim, and that's why we're going to the second shot. That those who we duplicated were the weak ones, and therefore Shimon and Levi that weren't duplicated are the strong ones. So how come Yehuda's name was duplicated? So the Rabbi was Rashi Bavornen, Yehuda shuchbas shmoi lo yuchpam shum chalishus elo tam yesh b'davar. Why was Yehuda's name duplicated? Not because of weakness, but there's a reason. This is very clear from the happening. The sons of Yaakov was what gelernt free that we learned earlier as Yehuda's given zwischen the Gebäude, that Yehuda was amongst the strong ones. He was the strong one, the strongest one amongst the tribes. The Melech Shvatim, he was the king of the Shvatim. He was compared to a lion, the line of the king of the animals. He is the one that stood up. Vayigash, Elov Yehuda. Yehuda stood up to Yosef to protect Binyamin. He stood up against Yosef, the second in command of Mitzrayim. Okay, so that's why, from information we know till now, we would rather go along with the second shot, that those were not duplicate, were strong. So to tell us that Shimon and Levi were strong. And Yehuda has a special reason. The problem is that also Binyamin's name is not duplicated. And that would mean that Binyamin is from the strong ones, in which we know that Binyamin seems to be the weak one. This is also difficult according to the second meaning, second interpretation. As Binyamin is given zwischen the Gebäude, his name wasn't repeated, so he was amongst the Gebäude. Based as Bepashtas is mashma, and simply it appears as that is given zwischen the Chaloshim, that he was amongst the weak ones. And he was the youngest. Werd angerufen, Yeletz Kunim Kotten. He's referred to as the child of the old age, the young one. Yaakov Avinu in B'myuchad Merigat. Yaakov, our father, specifically with him, was worried. And that a mishap might take place with him. So you see that Binyamin didn't appear. So also it appears that even at least Yehuda's rei to Yosef, when Yosef was talking about that, he made him into a case of Rachmana's case, somebody not strong. So we have that problem. We don't want Shimon and Levi to be amongst the weak ones. And that's why we want to go with the second shot, that their name is not mentioned double. But we also don't want Binyamin to be with the strong ones, because we know that he wasn't strong. So we don't want him to. So we want not duplicate them to be the ones that are the weak ones. For deswegen is the erste Pirush the Pirush Ikri. The first interpretation is the first one. Warum Leuten zweiten Pirush? Because according to the second interpretation, is Heinem es as dos was Yehuda zinim is a cloud from divas kafel Moshe Shmeisom. Let it be that Yehuda doesn't belong there, and we have a good reason. Cloud the kafel Moshe Shmeisom. We have a problem with that also. According to the second shot, why would we have Yehuda's name again? We know for sure Yehuda is the strong ones. And we answered that. Is a slibat zweitem tam, nit mishum chalisha. So it's another reason, not the weak. So we have a reason for that. So we still have 5. You really have 6. But Yehuda is for a special reason. Befrat der hat Gosh von Rashi, especially as Rashi says in Bracha, the 5 that he banished less, which means Yehuda is not part of the 5. Because he came first, and the last 5 were the ones, the weak ones. Still, we have a problem. Over there, the last ones, he repeated the names to strengthen them and to give them the strength, the Gevura. So still, the 5 tribes are not clearly distinguished, because you really have 6 duplicated names. In the end of the day, the end is Yehuda's Name noch mal geworden. Also, Yehuda's name has been duplicated. Und der Fahr ist der erste Pirush mer mistaber. And that's why the first interpretation is more, makes sense more. Hayois as divos loy kofal shmeisam. Those whose names were not duplicated are exactly 5. There's actually 6 that the names were duplicated. And we got an excuse for Yehuda, but you actually have 5 the names that are not duplicated. So an Oizgitel b'mispach hamish b'dok, they're distinguished number 5. So therefore, we'd rather go on with the first interpretation that's distinguished mikzeh of Lord Chamisha that don't have the names duplicated. Und die Oiber der Monte Schwierigkeit and the above mentioned difficulty was the Pirush Rishon, Zayin Shimon the Levi, that we say according to the first one that Shimon the Levi, Tzuvishin de Chaloshim, comes out that they are amongst the weak ones. So according to the first interpretation, that if their names the names were not duplicated, that points to the fact that they're weak, and we know that Shimon ben Levi killed Shechem and everything, so they have to be strong. That was the problem on the first pshat. That's why we went to the second pshat. So the Rebbe says, "Kemen farentru." You can answer it as Einoch inami zeizane given chaloshim. Let it be that they were weak. Und das was vayehargu. How is it possible for them to be chaloshim? Those was vayehargu kol zocher v'schamir v'shchem. They were able to kill all the males and Chamer and Shechem. Is das nicht given machmazer gevura? That wasn't because of their strength. But as a gewirkt, those was them gefühlt. Why did they do it? Because it impacted them. They felt of sich als the Elster. They were the oldest. The achrayis from the common emen. They took responsibility to take revenge. She will make our sister as a harlot, as a zoyna. Reuven didn't do it, so they had to step in. That they were in pain. So, not being the strongest, they still could take care. Because they had this great anger, as we learn Yaakov later on said, so that gave them this strength. So therefore Rashi feels more comfortable with the first pshat, because the first pshat we have a distinction. The 5 not mentioned are the weak ones. And the fact that Shimon and Levi need to be there, we can answer. However, Vav, in the portion of Zabracha, is from Pashas Aksuvim Mashma. Over there, the simple meaning appears as Divos Kofal Shmoison, Zayin as the Chaloshim. Those who we repeated the names are the weak ones. Unit verkehrt, and not the other way around. The Rebbe is going to explain what does it mean, the Kafal Shmoisum, and what does it mean to give them strength, or what does it mean, Kafal Shmoisum, that they were strong inherently. I want to first explain the reason for the differences between the two interpretations. Kefal Shmoisum is mitzad zer chalushus, whether duplicating the name comes because of their weakness, or the mitzad zer gevura, or it comes because of their strength. If we say that it's the weak ones that their names have been repeated, is there tama kefil? So why are we duplicating the name? So liptaisus bracha, we're adding the bracha. Rashi zog dort, as Rashi says there, that's part of the bracha, to strengthen them and to give them the strength and make them stronger. Because they were weak, they needed to come onto that blessing. That's part of the process of the blessing, to give them strength. But if we learn that the duplication of the names is meant the strong ones, is the Pirish in them. So what does that really mean? Zai in the Gebäude, because they were strong. That gave them a special importance. That has been expressed. Also the fact that the name was duplicated. Their names were felt, were sensed more, mer than the names of the other Shvatim. Say by Avram, they say, I'll make your name big. Duplicate, double. Derech Pirish Rashi, Avram. I says, Loshen Chibohu. I said, it's a dir, Shekoifel Shmoy, duplicates his name. But Rashi bringt nicht kein Asboris al Zeh. It's not Pshitz Adova. Rashi doesn't explain because it's obvious. So matter. So therefore, duplicating a name shows Chaviva's importance. What is the difference as far as Moshe Rabbeinu? The question is Moshe Rabbeinu giving them the strength, or we're just telling you who they are? The difference between these two duplication, whether we live as it relates to the blessing of Moshe itself, according to the interpretation that we are duplicating the names of the weak one, is to libatoisus bracha, is to add additional blessing, is move on, then it's understood that those was Moshe Rabbeinu had koifel given zeir shemes, this that he duplicated their names is a chelik behemshach from the bracha. That's a part, and it's a continuation of the blessing. But according to the interpretation that the Geberim are those whose names were duplicated, that has nothing to do with the bracha. That has to do with who they are. Is there kefal Hashem nit kechelik from Birchas Moshe? So the duplication of the name is not a part of the blessing of Moshe. The name of the Geberim werden nit übergechazert durch Moshe l'shem Tesis bracha. The names of these mighty brothers, the stronger brothers, are not repeated through Moshe because of additional blessing. Nor der monen digzeder nemen in der Torah. But when he mentions the names of Torah, is there's a koifel madgishmer. He doubles them and emphasizes them more to Libzer Peterson because of their publicity. Shmoy the name goes in front of him. Is move on. So based on this, we understand as when you learn simply the verse in Zisa Bracha, especially when you read the verses that speak actually in the blessing that Moshe was giving, it makes more sense that jeder Wort versteht by the Berachos von the Shvatim, that every word that is written by the blessings of the tribes is a chelik from Birchas Moshe. That's part of the blessings of Moshe. The Rebbe learned dort, that's his blessing. The Rebbe learned dort Rashi, that's what Rashi learns there. Adozaine given the chaloshim on kefel shmeseyim lachaschim lagbirim. That those were the weak ones, and he doubled their names to strengthen them and to give them the gevura. But if he's there, according to this, is Euchter Kefel Hashem an Inyan from Bracha. According to the duplication name, is also Eidim Bracha. This basically settles all the different Rashis, why in each place Rashi has to say why by our Parsha we have the difficulties, and Rashi needs both Pirushim, and how it doesn't conflict with Rashi Matis and Devarim, and also Mezoi Sabrocha, how it all fits. Now the Rebbe is going to go back to explain the lengthy Roshan in the Rashi, as the Rebbe asked. Zayin. Then, when ich verstehen, was Rashi is basically Parsha Seinu, where Rashi in our Parsha adds, Shehi Agod Eretz Yisrael. This is Agod Eretz Yisrael. Aval begemora Babel is Shalom, but the Babylon our Gemara. Warum does Git verstehen dem Teuchen von jedem Pirush? This gives us an understanding on the contents of each one of these commentaries, und dem Tam Achiluk zwischen the Pirushim, and the reason for the differences between the commentaries. Der Unterschied zwischen dem Limud in Eretz Yisrael, Talmud Yerushalmi, the difference between how we learn in Eretz Yisrael, which is the Yerushalmi Talmud, and the Limud Talmud Babli, and the study of Talmud Babli. They say that a Limud in Eretz Yisrael, the order, the way we learn in Yisrael is B'toichem v'siglein kotzer, is the content, and it's a short style. Nit mit kein arichas hashakal v'tarya in toichen ha'inyan. There is no lengthy give and take in the contents of the unit mit kein arichas haloshen, and not with a long language. The Gemara sagt, the Gemara says, Hai Tana Yerushalmi hu the Tana Lishna Kalila. This is a Jerusalem, a Tana, he learns a light language. Mashenki, they say that a limud in Babli, the order, the way we learn in the Gemara, in the Babli, in Gemara Bablis, is mitarichas is at length, sayin the shakel v'tari b'toichna inyanim, both in the give and take in the contents. Sayin the signal lotion also in the language used is a longer language. Und der Mit is move on was Preishis Rabba Shia Godas Eretz Yisrael, Preishis Rabba, which is the God of Israel, nemt on the shita that accepts the view as B'shas is do abreda to learn. When we have a choice to learn, Kefal Shmoy Sachalosh, that you duplicate the names of the weak ones, as Moshe Rabbeinu hot Meidich Geven, the Leshoinei, that Moshe Rabbeinu prolonged the Loshen, their mid was Kafal Shmoyson, by duplicating the names, Suli Babrocha, because he wanted to bless them. You could say a blessing, a prayer, very short. So you have one choice to say that he said the names to blessing and tefillah, or the lernen kefil shmois hagiborim, or to say that why did he duplicate the word as Moshe Rabbeinu hot mekatzer given l'shoinei. Moshe Rabbeinu short, he didn't give any brachas over here. He didn't give longer brachas. For in Dachpolos Hashem is nit kanadich saloshin from Bechosher Shel Moshe. It's not Moshe's blessing that is long. So we have a choice either to say Moshe Rabbeinu increased his brachas by saying the names, or that's not Moshe Rabbeinu. That's just not his tefillah, not his prayer. But this is something separate. This is Mudgish in Torah. The Torah emphasizes that because of the strength, their name goes in front of them. So then we need to accept, as Moshe Rabbeinu gesagt the bracha b'loshen kitzara, he said it in the short version, und die chaloshim, and the weak ones are in oisom shalekov of Moshe shmeisum k'shabarach. The weak ones are the ones that Moshe did not duplicate the names when he benched them. We're not going to say that the duplication of names is an increase in the language of Moshe. But only the kafel for another reason. But in our Gemara, the way we learn the Babel, that in order to get additional explanation in the contents of the idea, the order needs to be from Narichas b'signa b'loshen, to prolong in the style and the language. And then we have to accept as kafel Moshe Shmoiso, that the reason that Moshe duplicated the name is given l'shem toisus bracha. That was for the purpose to add blessing to the shvatim chaloshim, to the weak shvatim. As Moshe Rabbeinu hot meidich given b'l'shoim b'chosom, that Moshe Rabbeinu prolonged the language of the blessing, b'chdei lechaskom lagbirom, in order to strengthen them and give them gvura. Unagam as meken oifton oich durch habrochot tefillah kitzara. Since also you can accomplish through a blessing and a short, we don't need to add the name again. Since through the duplication, longer language, this adds additional strength and emphasis. That's what we should accept as a Zayt Moshe Gitan. That's what Moshe did. That's why we're saying in Agodas Babel Shalonu that Moshe may duplicate the name to give them extra bracha. Ches. Move on. According to this, we also understand. Rashi is Mosif. Rashi adds, but I said the Sifri Shoninu Bo, Zoy Sabrach, maybe more Shalom. The Sifri we learned as in Zoy Sabrach, like in our Gemara. From Kol Hanal Kumtois, from all the above, it turns out. As in jeden von den zwei Pirushim is do a zwei in Diker Yisra and Lagabe in zwei Pirush. That in each one of these two interpretations is a double advantage relative to the other interpretation. Aleph mitzat pashtus aksuvim, the way we learn the simple of the psukim that we know who was strong, who was not strong. That's in our place. And mitzad dem inyan from kevel shmoisom, and also as we duplicate their names. explains the Meilik Fula in the Ersten Pirush. What is the double advantage according to the first Pirush? Aleph was Lifia movement from Pshute Shal Mikra Da, as we understand here in simple, is Binyamin given from the Chaloshim, und Yehuda from the Gebäude. Yamin was the weak one, and he was from the Gebäude. So therefore, we want Binyamin's names to be duplicated, and we want Yehuda's name to be duplicated because he was a Gibber. And we don't want, and Binyamin's name not being duplicated makes him a Cholosh. That's an advantage. That fits. Base, besides the Torah tel tois, when the Torah distinguishes Miktzerach of Lochach, Chamisha Anoshim, it takes 5, und teits the Sois verse Zaine, doesn't say who they are, is Mistaber as their mit werden gemein, the 5 Shvatim Chaloshim. That we mean the 5 weak Shvatim. Hayois, as the mit was Leikof of Moshe Shmoisom, since Moshe did not look at it, is do a Genoyer Misper of the Chamisha Anoshim Shvatim Canal. There is exactly 5 people Shvatim Canal. So that's the advantage of the first one, has these both advantages. Binyamin and Yehuda fit into the meaning of the pasuk, and also the 5 is exactly those are not mentioned. The Yisra and Kofel in second Pirush. The double advantage in the second Pirush is Aleph. Yes, as movement of Pshute Shemikra is also Zayin Shimon Levi given from the Gebäude. Or not from the Chaloshim, they from the Gebäude, but not the Chaloshim. And if the names weren't duplicated, we have to say they were the Chaloshim. So that's better to say that the weak ones were duplicated. The second base is Mer Mistaber as Achpolos Hashem is a brocha in an inyan was a kesh that's a brocha. That duplicating the name is a blessing, and it's something which is connected to the blessing itself, which will to strengthen them. It's better to say that which is long as the mid is the Torah Maramis. At Sveitni, the Torah is trying to tell you something else as an Gebäude, as an just the Gebäude. But it's not negated after by giving say a bracha. That's not important when giving them bracha. But Adrabah, das is in an Ordbus is retzich wegen seiner eigenen Meiles, were their own advantage, not we're giving them the bracha. Und auch dem zweiten Yisrael is Rashi in Madgish. The second is Rashi, emphasis mit dem, was bringt dem Sifri. Brings Sifri. Und as in Sifri, schon ninu bo bevizoy sabrocha, ki b'moishe morosh alonu. Over there in Vizoy sabrocha. Hayois, as do steht in Vizoy sabrocha, this is written in Vizoy sabrocha, is mistaber aroich, the kefal hashoimus, is an inyan from brocha. That makes sense to say that the duplication name is part of the blessing. Und geschehen wie in the erste zwei Perushim is Rashi Matim, then Chiluk, just like in the first two interpretation, Rashi makes it tasty, the Chiluk zwischen den Rishitas, durch Meitzev sein, Shi Agoda Seres Yisrael, that it's the Agoda Vetzvah, being more Babli Shalonu. But there is the mitzvah Ram is the derech limudo. The way Rashi Mosif bebraise is free. Alle Inyonim verstehen in the Braise nehmen sich von the Mishnayos. They'll come from the Mishnah. But mit dem Chilik as the Mishnah is do bekitzur beremes. The Mishnah is short and mahid. Dover kotzer vekoil Inyonim Ram. The Braise is short, includes many items. And in the Braise, that's the Mishnah. In the Braise is das Mefurish Barichas Beprotim. The Braise it is articulated at length and specifically. And the limit is Rashi Merames. Here Rashi hints as the Derech Hasidur in Braise Barichas, that the order in Braise by length is Masbir Matim, that gives explanation and makes it sweet, tastes. Because the Braise is free, learned with the Baruch Bablis that learns like the Babylonians. Those names that Moshe Rabbeinu duplicated are the weak one. As Moshe Rabbeinu had Meirich, he prolonged the and he duplicated them in order to strengthen them and make them strong. Afal Pikein, and still it does be Parsha Seinu at Zweiter Pirush. In our Parsha it's the second Pirush. But Oder Yisrael for Zweiter Pirush, that advantage of the second Pirush is Be'ikir Shayich. Dort was retzich wegen Bracha, but there where it talks about the Bracha in Vizoy Sabrocha. That's why Rashi said The simple meaning of Parsha Hotman, hat mehr order Yisra in dem ersten Pirush Canal. There's more room for the advantage, as the first Pirush I said before. Wow. Okay, everybody can just how the Rebbe puts all this together in such a beautiful way. I don't usually like to comment, but this is amongst unique. This was unique. Sichas Shabbos Parshas Matis Umasei Tovshin Chavtes.